You know, it's funny. I was just recently I was in a live conversation talking with Josh, Matt, and Kathy, which I will link, which was about the Stone of Farewell, Book 2 in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, a series that I love by Tad Williams. And they were just talking about how slow they felt about it. I'm like, man, I really didn't feel that. This one I feel it. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about Shadowmarch, the first book in the Shadowmarch, not a trilogy, of course, as Tad Williams, but 4-book series, the tetralogy. And this was something that I have not quite had the experience that I was really expecting to with. So this book, it does start out really slow, and that is me saying that. And mostly, I didn't know a whole lot about this. This is another fantasy series that he's done, so I've been really excited to read this. Everyone has said the big thing I've heard is very different than Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, but it's very good. That's what I've heard. And it is very, very different. And I knew that, and yet I still think it took me a while to get into this. Partially because absolutely this does have a slow start, and partially just because this is not my typical kind of story, and it's quite different in the type of story that it is, even though it is well written. And so I found myself just not enjoying it as much for that, although I still liked some pieces of it. Now, to address the slow start, because there's just no other way about it. This literally starts with like an info dump history lesson, basically, about the history of the world. And then we're introduced to these characters, and there's kind of a lot being slowly introduced. So it took a bit. Overall, though, it feels like a very like older kind of like classic dark fantasy, kind of like, your 60s maybe fantasy feel, where it's like not necessarily like written for a younger audience, but kind of sort of feels like a little bit younger in the middle there, and that kind of more classic dark fantasy feel is what this feels like. I was at the same time that I was reading this, which is like, a little over 20 years old. It's not super old. I started Blood in the Mist, which is like a 100-year-old book, and they felt a little bit similar in style at points. And so it's just like, it feels kind of dated, and it's I think what he's going for with the writing style. It's this very classic sort of like, not quite, I said this about something else recently, but not quite the fairy tale, but kind of the folklore, the dealing with like the fae, that type of thing that you find in some of like the, Irish folklore, I think especially. And so it has sort of some of that feel. And it's also more of like a character focused with like a lot of politics and that type of thing. And it's a little bit more self-contained as well. So you have Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, which is the big epic fantasy with like the adventure and the quest and like all the big things happening like there. Still important with the characters, but that's kind of the focus here. And this is just a different feel. And it's funny because in some ways they have somewhat similar plots, where Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, the setup, you have the Norns, who are kind of like the, evil elf type characters, who they want their land back, and they're trying to rise up and take the things that were taken by humans. And this starts, has kind of a similar premise with the Fae, the Dark Fae people wanting to take back the land and the Shadowmarch in this area that they had before too. But we're not focusing as much on that. We're focusing more on, almost on like a murder mystery in this first book, because the Prince Regent is killed, and trying to figure out what happened there is a big part of it. And then we're really focusing on our two characters, Barrack and I did a little bit of this on audio, and they say Bryony. So Brienne is kind of how I pronounced it when I was physically reading it. So I'm going to probably switch. But it's these two characters who are twins, and so they're the younger siblings of the prince who is killed, and they both deal with it in really different ways. And I think the character study here is really interesting, because you have Barrack, who kind of just can't deal with it, and he goes into himself. He also has some other things going on, but he just is really struggling to deal with everything that's happening. And so Bryony ends up having to kind of try to like take over, and she's running things, and really, really jumping into that role. So I think it's interesting because you have already you're taking some different approaches, where you're not going the route that you would think that's going to happen with like, oh, this happens, you have the twins, but you see the princess, who's the one who's kind of like really trying to step into that role and take control of things. And there are a few plot lines that are kind of teased that you think are going to go a certain way that don't necessarily go that way as well, which to Tad Williams, like, I had enough trust. Like, this is the kind of thing where you get a lot of benefit of the doubt when you're Tad Williams, one of my favorite authors, is that things were going to not be as simple as they sound, but they start off sounding like it's going to be a very stereotypical, very tropey type of thing, going different routes. But also the big thing is you have a shadow line, which is beyond that, is like the shadow. I kept thinking like banish you to the shadow realm. I couldn't help it. But the shadow line, where that's kind of like where the Fae are, and it's almost like described in some ways sort of like the Blight, where except instead of being like sickly, it's like shadowy and mysterious, like you're going into the Fae type of land there, which is happening as well. And again, so we have that as the backdrop, but we're focused much more very self-contained within the castle in Shadowmarch, where we're spending a lot of time here. And you also, like, you have specifically, they're called the Thunderlings, which are kind of like, dwarf type of race, and they live underground and are they're responsible for building. But we have one of those characters as well, who finds a boy just across the shadow line, and it's kind of mysterious there as well, so we're trying to figure that out. And then there's a plot line that we don't actually spend a lot of time with, which I might partially be why I wasn't super into it too, but we also have a character who's in a different land, kind of showing us, because we have another threat from this like emperor called the Autarch, who's kind of like a god king. And there's a young woman from the priesthood who's taken to be another one of his wives, and he has like hundreds of wives, and they live in the seclusion, and so it's kind of a plot line we have going on there as well, which just seemed like I think some of it's because it's going to be setting up stuff for later books, but I wasn't super into it there, really, to be honest, either. And so those are kind of all the things going on. So there's a lot actually happening here. It's a bit slower, and it is really well written. And I think Tad Williams takes it into some really interesting directions and does some really, really cool things with this. I think part of it also, though, is this is the epitome of a setup book, and I think you have to know that, and that's why I'm planning to continue the series. I know I'm doing a lot of complaining. I did end up, I'll note too, I ended up about a 3.5, because I thought about going slightly higher, because the ending is very good. But again, part of it's just subjectively, this isn't my type of story in the same way that Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn was. And so this just was a less to my taste than I normally feel like I get with Tad Williams. Although I have to say too, part of it is, so Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn I really loved. I love Last King, Lost Nard, and I need to try more Tad Williams, but he also is really diverse, because I tried Bobby Dollar, which could not be more different from his other stuff. I know Otherland is really different, so he's like, it seems like he just likes to really do very different things, and this is, I think, there. But also, I'm feeling optimistic still, because this, in so many ways, there was so much that was set up here, and we've done a lot, so I'm hoping that we just kind of run with it in the next books as we continue on in the series, because it's just a lot of things don't happen the way that you would expect from the way that it's set up, which is very Tad Williams, that he likes to do. And so I'm still feeling optimistic here, even though this was not quite my type of book in style, and I wasn't super into it. So this took me a little bit to get through, although I think there's a lot of things that were really done. Some really good writing. I think the ending is very strong. I just was never super invested, unfortunately, in it, and I'm hoping that will pick up for me more in the next one. But really, those were my thoughts on Shadowmarch. Let me know. Like I said, I've heard from a lot of people, like, hey, it's very different, but it's good. So let me know, like, did you feel similar from this, or did you like it more immediately? Because I do some reassurance about the later books would help me a little bit here. I joked in the intro, I was there to reassure people about Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, a series I love. This one, though, like I said, I am planning to continue, but I don't know that I will do it right away. I was planning on doing a book a month for these, and I don't know that I'm going to do that, just because I was not to do it as I had hoped, and they're long books, so trying to fit in longer books when I'm not really feeling it, I'm probably not going to go the best. So I might slow down a little bit, although I am absolutely still going to be continuing the series for sure. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this series if you have read it. Absolutely. That's it for this one, though. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description, as always, for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.